Muslim child.
Not just a child, a Mormon candidate for presidency.
Well, at least the candidate for presidency is grown up. At least he can answer for his opinions. He can say, yes, I believe in Mormonism because. But if it's a 4-year-old child, then I think it's almost a form of child abuse to label the child with the opinions of its parents.
How do you define the God delusion? When someone asks you, what is the God delusion?
The unquestioning belief that there is a supernatural creator behind the universe who reads our thoughts and listens to our prayers and governs our lives.
And if not him or her, then what? How did we get here?
Oh, well, there's a lot in the book about that. The scientific account of how we got here is not yet complete. Science is working on it. The account of how we got here in biology is pretty much complete. Evolution, Darwinian natural selection is a fact.
From origin of the species.
You're talking about Darwin's book, The Origin of Species. Well, that's when it was first broken upon the world, yes. But there's been a lot since then. I mean, the modern view of evolution has moved on a lot since Darwin's time. Darwin was essentially right. But when you go to before life started, how did the universe start? How did the cosmos start? How did the laws of physics come into existence? That's more difficult at the moment. Physicists are still working on that. And there is a convergence in science on what looks like a satisfying explanation, but we're not there yet. What you can say is that the alleged solution, God did it, is not a solution at all. That just won't answer any questions because it begs the question of where God himself, herself, or itself came from.
When you put the God delusion together, did you study the holy books? Did you study the Bible, the Koran, to help you write this?
I wouldn't say study, no. You wouldn't study learned books on fairies before saying you don't believe in fairies. I actually have a reasonable knowledge of the Bible from childhood, when I admire it greatly as a work of literature. I mean, the 17th century, 16th century English of the King James Version is very beautiful, and I've got quite a lot of it, sort of phrases of it in my head. And so I do have a kind of familiarity with the Bible, not with the Quran at all.
When you read the Bible as a child, there's some really bizarre stories.
They tend to keep those away from children on the whole, but yes.
True, but there, you know, and there's some wonderful stories, Jonah and the Whale, or the Ark, and some beautiful speeches, Sermon on the Mount by Jesus. And you think, well, I don't know, what's true, what's not? Is it myth? Is it allegory? Is there something I should get from this? When you grow up and you start to question, or did this really happen?
There are so many such myths, and every tribe in the world has similar myths, and so there's absolutely no reason why, because you happen to have been born into a Christian culture. The particular myth, which is originally from Babylonians and the Jews and then modified by the Christians, there's absolutely no reason to give that priority over the myths of the Australian Aboriginals or the Azandi or any other tribe. It's as long as you treat them as myths, they are beautiful, and they do tell you something about human psychology, anthropology, but don't think that just because you happen to have been born a Christian, therefore Christianity's got to be true. You happen to have been born a Jew, happen to have been born a Muslim, therefore that particular myth is true.
I remember as a young one sitting in a catechism class and not being allowed to question, being allowed to listen and to memorize and to recite. But if you questioned, they didn't want you to speak out.
Well, I'm not entirely surprised.
My particular person,
yes,
I don't know.
Surprised. It is nevertheless shocking. I mean, that a child should have its natural tendency to question suppressed is, I think, shocking. Although, as I say, it's not actually surprising when it's a case of religion. That, of course, is how religious indoctrination works. It wouldn't survive if we were all encouraged as children to question.
How are we primed for religion psychologically, as humans?
Well, I think that there are good biological reasons why children are primed to obey their parents and to believe their parents, and parent figures such as teachers and priests. So there are very good reasons why children ought to believe what they're told, because life's a dangerous place. Life's a dangerous business. The world's a dangerous place. And so believe your parents when they warn you of danger, believe your parents when they give you good advice. But it's not possible to build a child, to prime a child with that, without it being vulnerable to bad advice, like waste hours of every day praying, for example, doing futile things like that. There's no obvious way in which the child can sort out which bits of advice are good advice and which bits of advice are bad advice. So I think that the child is automatically primed with a vulnerability to inherit from previous generations of children, so to speak, who've grown up, to inherit from previous generations nonsense, which nobody really knows is nonsense, but it's traditional nonsense, which gets passed down from generation to generation. It's local nonsense, it's different in different parts of the world, but it gets passed down, and every generation of children grows up believing this nonsense and then passing it on to their children, precisely because they do believe it.
Was there morality before there was religion?
Of course. I mean, the great moral principles, like the Golden Rule, do as you would be done by, behave to others as you'd wish them to behave to you. These are principles which have grown up in all civilizations, and there's some evidence that that humans are actually primed by their genetics, by their evolutionary heritage, to such moral rules.